Hi, I'm Patric Palm, CEO and founder of Favro, and this is the Learn from Leaders podcast. The background to these interviews is that Favro clients are some of the most innovative and agile businesses out there. And it's used for collaborative planning by marketing teams, by product teams, HR, management teams. And what this means is that we get to know some truly inspiring people. So what we do in this podcast is that I invite them here for a conversation about something where they are true leaders, so we can all learn from it. Let's go. Don, great to have you here. This is the first episode of the second season of our podcast, Learning from Leaders. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here.
All right, so let's get started, because we have a lot of listeners to our podcast that are not in the game industry. So, I mean, the super short version of, Don is that, he's a game designer, producer, programmer. He had his first hits already in the 70s, but, he had, hits way later than that. And, you got an Emmy. So, I mean, the list can go very long. But I actually have a question, because, you have one of those like super crazy, bios that's easily can sound megalomaniac, but when you go to like some kind of cocktail party or whatever with I know your wife too, she's very nice, and you're socializing, you're meeting someone who actually knows nothing about the game industry, and they say, hey, so what do you do? I mean, how do you normally actually present yourself in that situation?
Actually, what I do what I do is I just say, oh, I'm a video game designer. And then usually, because I have silver hair, and obviously having been making games for 50 years, I'm not a young man anymore. And people's eyes go wide and they look at me and I go, yeah, people usually are surprised to hear that from a guy with silver hair. So
that's awesome. I remember the first time I met you in Leipzig for the game developer conference. We were both speakers, and we met at like a speaker's drink the day before the conference started. Do you remember that still?
Oh, I remember it very clearly, because it was my first time speaking at a European event. And frankly, I was a little nervous because, I did not know people in the community well. You don't want to come in and sound like you think you're the guy who knows everything. And I was nervous, and you were so warm and friendly, and you just struck up a conversation with me, and you made me feel very, very comfortable. So I have always remembered that conversation. I've always appreciated your kindness.
Thanks for saying that. It was a really good conference. I think that conference moved after that to, it was some other city in Germany, but I always remember that Leipzig was such a cool city. And there was these like blue pipes everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I was asking people, is this some kind of art installation, or what is it? And apparently they were like pumping water out of the ground. It was such a cool experience. And I remember my speech at that conference was about scaling agile software development to large teams and distributed teams, which is funny. This is such a long time ago, and distributed teams today seems to be what everyone's doing, obviously because of COVID and post-COVID now. But so we were a little bit ahead of time, there. But I think game developers are always quite ahead of time. Taking what you just said there about the silver hair. Have you ever heard the expression the golden years of Hollywood?
I have. And unfortunately, the golden years of Hollywood are usually described as being 60 to 90 years ago. So
yeah, but because what I'm wondering is that, do you think that in the future, when people are going to talk about the golden years of game development, do you think that that's something that has already happened? Do you think we are in it right now, or do you think it's still to come?
I don't think there is such a thing as actual golden years. I think that creative media go through waves of innovation where cool new stuff is happening. New ways of doing things like Favro are coming along. And then you have times when you're moribund, when things are just kind of standing still.
Yeah.
And ironically, some people wish for those stable times. Okay, it's the same platforms, it's the same kind of games. You can build a game, you can predict to some degree how much it will sell. It's easier to plan in times when things are not being shaken up. But game players, and in fact, software users of any kind, they get the most benefit from the times when everything is changing and innovating. So I think there are different perceptions of golden ages, but I think we probably keep going brass, silver, gold, silver, brass, silver, gold in waves. And I think that's just part of human nature, that's the way things work.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that there's a lot of people coming into the game development industry from other industries, such as, for example, film. And often what they're saying is that, well, this is still like a frontier. There's still things being discovered. There's still like so much change. The rules aren't set yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm going into this industry. It can be everything from like film producers going into games to even investors, I think it's interesting. But let me ask you something totally different. If you were 20 today, would you choose to go into the game industry, or would you do something different?
Knowing what I know now, I know this is what I feel like I was made to do. Games are a passion for me, and working in this space, whether I'm doing my own work or working with teams that I advise, I still love it. And when you're 20, you have no way of knowing if you will love what you're doing 50 years later.
Yeah.
But it turns out that for me in games, I still love it. So I think this feels like what I was destined to do. Knowing that, I would absolutely go into games again if somebody said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to get here's another 40 years and a fresh shot to start from scratch. Have a good time, kid." No, yeah. I would definitely, I would race to the exit to run to the games industry at that moment, just because that's where my passions lie.
So going into then, what are the topics of today? So if we take the perspective of someone who is going into the game industry today, possibly starting at, I guess one of the things that have truly changed between, when you created your first hit versus today is that today you can really pursue a career by going to a university and study this. And that wasn't around in the 70s. So if we take the perspective of a student who is at one of these, great schools teaching game development and are eager to, get their hands dirty and start creating some stuff, what would you? I mean, I know you actually do this as a mentor, so I mean, I'm making it very easy for you. But what would be your advice?
I think that, first of all, if somebody is at a university that is not a game specialized school, I would encourage them to think about games careers if that's their passion. I wouldn't say that not having gone to a game training program, that is not an automatic, oh, it will never work. It changes the path is all. But I think you hit the nail on the head, and that is that idea of, if you want to get your hands dirty and do something, one of the big things that game schools have is they are doing game projects as part of your university work, putting students together in groups, having deadlines, having to create something that's useful, playable within a certain period of time. And what that does is it lets people learn the realities of teamwork. Mm-hmm. Because it's true. I think the one thing people get nostalgic for is, when I started out, it was one programmer. The programmer was the designer. Very often we were also the artists. One person created a game with, you had feedback from people around you, but one person built that game. We're talking 1981 here. So that's no longer the case. And teamwork, the ability to work in teams, and the ability to be able to understand all of the issues that can come up in teams, because different personalities, different work styles, and the fact that different kinds of personalities will come into different creative crafts. Artists are trained to think in a different way than engineers are trained to think.
Mhm.
I was originally trained before I was captured by the games industry. I was trained as a playwright. So I was trained in another different way, and learning how to take those differences and leverage them and take advantage of them instead of just, oh, no, you guys have got it all wrong. Wait, do it my way. That's an important learning. Wherever somebody starts out, though, I think it's important to learn a specialty, because now that the industry is mature and there are lots of people looking for jobs, you want to have a skill that is hard for publishers, for game developers, for studios to find. If you have a skill that is easy to find, well, then people aren't going to be looking for you as much. And what that skill is depends on your passions, but pursuing it to the level of expertise and developing a very high level of skill at whatever your chosen field is, I think that's critical.
So on that topic, have you ever heard the term T-shaped personalities?
I've heard about T-shaped industries. I don't think I've heard about T-shaped personalities.
Yeah, I actually like that term, because it basically says that, the thing that you just said, that you need to have something where you have depth, right? But at the same time, you also need to be a little bit more of a generalist than in the past, because if you're going to be a truly autonomous team, being able to create some amazing stuff together, you need to understand each other's craft.
Yes.
So you need to have that overlap, so you can really work as a team, but you need to have that specialty. It's kind of interesting, I think they have a little bit of a military background in the Swedish Air Force, and that's also one of the things with special ops that everyone's an officer, technically speaking. Everyone's amazing at pretty much everything, but everyone is also having something where they go deep, So let's say that someone is hurt. Everyone knows that, okay, that person is the one who's going to be the medic right now.
Yep.
But if we don't have that person, everyone can be a medic. It's just that there's one who's the best. And I think this, I'm seeing a bit of this pattern in game development too, when we're starting to get more cross-functional teams, and every team is almost like a little mini startup,
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key to them actually working together is that, they have these T-shaped personalities that can actually, understand each other's craft.
And I think even on top, first of all, I really agree with that. And I think especially as you get more into remote teams where people are not all physically with each other, that becomes even more important, that ability to understand why somebody is doing something a certain way or why it's important. I think I would put one more thing on top of that for people who are specifically interested in the games industry. I would extend that breadth of skill also to studying things like film, studying things like history, studying things like cultures. If you put Sid Meier, Richard Garriott, Lord British, Bruce Shelley, all of these big award-winning, Will Wright. Now, because of the time when I came in, I've had the privilege of being around these guys. And if you put them in a coffee shop with a piece of pie and a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, they will talk games, but pretty quickly they may start talking about history or literature or art, because they have a breadth of interest, and that shows up in their designs. So I think that's another part of the bottom of that T, of that inverted T.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So, moving from that then to, okay, so let's say that you have these things in mind and you're now entering your career. So we're going to take one specific example, which is obviously a bit close to heart for me, which is producer or, development director or anything similar. I see some very, let's say, typical paths to that. One is starting in QA, and kind of escalating your career and you move into producer role. I also see starting as more of a product manager in another industry, but really want to go into game development. You're moving in there, and have a couple of other similar paths too. And since you have a lot of producer experience, and I know you've been coaching a lot of producers, I mean, what would you say? Well, to put it simply, what would be a good path?
I think there's two answers to that. The weird answer is whether you're doing a project with friends while you're in university, or whether you're doing a game jam. Are you the one who is organizing things? Because if you put a group of people together to do something, somebody ends up being the one. Okay, I'll take notes. Okay, I'll make an outline out of this. I'll get it to you guys. They may not think of themselves as being a producer, but the person who does that naturally is probably going to be happier as a producer. And choosing something you love, I keep saying over and over, but that's critical. You're trying to chase your passions, not just the money of a career.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is, if you come from any background where organizing things and being the organized person is part of what you do well and enjoy, that suggests that if you have an angle into the games industry, I think that's the path. I think it's more about what the person is like and less about what their prior preparation has been.
Yeah. So let's continue on this track. So let's talk about artists. So how would you say that the typical career path and, let's say, the core of the job have changed in the last 10 to 15 years for artists? What because obviously, like, tooling has evolved enormously. But talent is at the core, right? So what's your perspective on what's the difference between making a good artist today versus 15 years ago?
I think, first of all, there are a lot more specialties today. If you go back 15 years, we would talk about, that person's a technical artist. And that would refer to skills on maybe Maya or Max, or but a fairly limited number of tools could be covered by that. Or you might have your proprietary tools where you're doing specialized scripting, which is what teams I've led have often done, and you'd have a technical artist doing that scripting. If you look at it now, there are many more tools, there's more kinds of things being done, and there are more specialties. So there are more ways for artists to find a way to be a contributor, and to be a contributor whose skills are not easy to find. Yeah. So I think that's one aspect. I think the flip side is, I have seen great technical artists who were good artists. They were not great. If they were doing traditional art, it was good, but they were not going to be the ones coming home with the grand prize from the Paris Salon. But I think that at its heart, understanding art, because non-artists, and as you know, my mother was a professional artist. Non-artists very often think of this as a mechanical skill. You learn to take your eye and your wrist and coordinate it in such a way that you can paint or draw and do something. When in reality, art also has its own technology of how does light work? How does perspective work? Which is very complex mathematics, except artists who are traditional artists have to do it intuitively. When we do 3D stuff, I can just calculate it, no problem. Yeah. I can make the perspective look right. And I did not inherit my mother's art skills. But so understanding that there is a science to art is an important thing for other teams, I think, team members to understand in terms of that. And that's something that does not change, that understanding of the scientific part of art before you ever get to the computer gives you the art of composition. That gives you something to work with as you develop a technical skill, which I think is a great thing to do for someone's career.
So you have a programmer background yourself. So let's do the same exercise with programmers. I mean, we don't have to go back to the 70s and 80s, but if we, again, I would argue that it's quite different today versus, again, 15 years ago for a game programmer. But what would you say?
I think there's no question. And I think there's a trend here. There's more specialization again. There are more ways to specialize. In some places, we need less code. Engines like Unreal and Unity have made it so a lot of things that we would normally have to code now can be done simply by using the tool. And somebody who's a skilled person using the tools can avoid a lot of code writing because the engines will do it for you.
Yeah.
But to differentiate what you're doing in any craft, including engineering, you have to be able to go in and do something that requires you and not just the AI or the machine to do something. And so I think the traditional specialties that I think of are not necessarily, I think, some of the ones that people would think about, because I think about graphics display, I think will always be a specialty, because however good the engines get, if you're going to create unique views or you're going to do something special, you have to be able to have engineers who can go in and go way past all the things that are done for you by any system. And they have to interact directly with the metal on the machine to, at speed, create a visual effect or do something. And so, whereas a VFX artist can do absolute magic with the tools and create looks you've never done before, that's how a VFX artist would do that. For an engineer, it's the ability to go low into the metal. So it's not just using high level languages, it's being able to go into the assembly and go down to the machine code level. On the flip side, there are people who are gameplay engineers, and gameplay engineer has become, I think, a more and more important field, because the gameplay engineer, there's kind of this continuum where you have a gameplay engineer at the most technical side of something. You have level designers who are now doing work that both engineers and environmental artists did at one time. You have environmental artists doing work that level designers did at some time. And you have gameplay engineers playing with a lot of this stuff. And we have much more overlap between the skill sets and how people can get assigned. But the fact is, there's a lot of different kinds of engineering, and some teams have very specific things. If you look at wargaming and how they broke out with World of Tanks, they had engineers who had specialties in the timing of that online experience. And having done a lot of work online, dealing with latency, it's the big 6,000-pound gorilla in the room. And they had experts in that. So all these new specialties in engineering, I think, have grown as well.
All right, cool. So if you're a talented engineer, there's a space for you. So let's turn the tables. Are you ready? Let's talk about the employer point of view. And I mean, I was about to say, we're both multiple CEOs, but I realize, you have, of course, many more of those than me. So, you know quite a bit about recruitment. So taking the talent landscape today and taking what we just were talking about, I just got to the level that I realized that when your company is at a certain level of success, the only thing that really matters is what kind of team you put together. And as I said, I'm a third-time CEO, and it took me it took me 3 times to really learn this. And I know you have a big passion for this question. And how would you recruit today? And if you would put yourself in the shoes, because many of the Favro clients are game studios that have venture backing. They're now going to double, triple the workforce because that's what they raised money for, right? So it's like the tip, and of course, as much as I would like to blow the trumpet for Favro and having the right tool for collaborative planning and all that, still, if you put bad people into your organization, it's not going to go well. So your ability to recruit talent is going to be more important than anything else. For these studios that just raise money, bring a lot of people in. So, if you put yourself into the shoes of that leadership in that company, I mean, how would you think today in terms of getting the right talent? And where would you find it?
So I think the first thing, to be backwards again, the first thing to think about is how you'll retain talent. Because if you think about retaining talent, what is the culture of your studio, or what is the culture of your company? And that's even more important. It's always been critical to think about, what are your values? What do you stand for? What can somebody count on if they work for you?
Mm-hmm.
That's always been important to decide upon and then be consistent about. Well, with distributed teams, yes, we're using tools to help us, but we also we still have to develop that sense of culture. And if you think of different large companies, whether it's a stereotype or the truth, we associate with, you'll take company X and you'll say, oh, that's a grindhouse. They grind you into the ground, because you've heard that. And you hear about another company and you hear, well, people have a lot of input there. I'm always hearing about how there's a lot of input, there's a lot of listening going on, and ideas come from everybody up into the company, not just from like 5 people. So that is the very rough edge. That's the rumor and stereotype edge of the reality of whatever you act like as a leader
Mm-hmm.
sets the pattern for the culture of your studio.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's a culture people want to work in, that will then help your recruitment. So if you start by thinking, how will I make people want to work here, as in keeping the people we get, you're automatically making the right decisions to start recruiting, because you're building a great place to work. Once you have that, then the fact of recruiting is looking, if you have a small team and these people reflect not only the skills you want, but also the values, the work style. Do they show respect for others? Are they listeners as well as talkers? Do they play as a team, or do they want to be the star with the spotlight on them? And they're special. Whatever those things are, if you've got the team you want, even that first core, the first 3 people can set a personality to a company that will still be there after 30,000 people. I was very, very fortunate to be early at Electronic Arts, and when EA hit maybe 500 people, the basic culture, all the pluses and minuses of our culture, were about the same as when there were 45 people there. So, and from people I know who were there at the very beginning, basically it was the same for them. So we start outright reflecting what you believe in is important. I think that in 2022, for those of us who've been in the industry for a long time, we have to recognize that people change with generations. You don't manage the same way every 10 or 20 years going forward. And I think the most critical thing is the skill of listening and absorbing and benefiting from what you hear and learn from the team, as well as sharing and telling to the team.
So let's say that you have that in place, and you're now employing a headhunter to go look for the right people. I mean, where would you send them? Would you simply go to other companies, or are there some places where you can find talent that maybe a lot of recruiters are missing?
Well, being married to a recruiter has always made this easy for me, because I've turned to the recruiter and said, well, where do you think you would look? And but I think that the key, and I guess I'm having themes emerge here, is obviously we're looking for skills. We're looking for people who can do things, and we can, for many skills, it can be found both within and outside the games industry. Less so, obviously, with game design itself. But a lot of the skills can also be found inside, and you find passionate people outside the games industry who would like to work in games. But I think that as important as looking for skills is looking for cultural fit. And looking for people who, whatever is the real culture, not the culture you wish you had. Oh yes, our culture. Well, it's kind of like heaven in most religions. Everybody walks around and there's always happy, and there's plenty of snacks in the kitchen. Yes, it's a beautiful place. You know, a lot of people say that's the culture, and it's not. So if your real culture is drawing certain kinds of people, they thrive there and things are going well. Look at the culture and the personality, the passions, and the style of those people, and then say, where would those people who will fit, as well as the people who have the skills, where will I find them? And that's where you want to look and what you're looking for, in my view, because you're not just building teams of skill, you're building teams of like-minded people who agree in reasonably broad terms about how to go about doing things, and then they can argue productively in the areas where they disagree.
Yeah. I think that's the last thing you said there, being able to argue in a productive way, it's actually quite hard, because let's not go political here, but society today is not very good at that. So but when you run a company, when you run a team, it's such a key skill, as I said. So you can't have those kind of patterns which seems to be happening in society right now, where because we're in the business of solving problems. If you probably heard this expression that a company is the sum of all the problems solved. Sorry, the value of a company is the sum of all the problems solved. I actually like that. I like that quote, and it kind of goes back to that whole thing with, if you're going to reach that, you need to have a team who's able to actually talk to each other, solve problems, even when you don't agree, move forward, okay, next problem, and so forth.
And a lot of it, I think, too, is when people come to work, and this is something that you can look at in how you build teams. Some people come to work, and if there's something wrong, first of all, some people start their careers and they think that every famous game company is perfect. And the fact is, if you take whatever the most famous games in the world have ever done, World of Warcraft, or Civilization, or whatever it is, and you talk to people on the team, they'll say, "Oh God, we made so many mistakes. Oh, this was all screwed up." It's what you do after the mistakes and how you get past things screwing up.
Yeah.
That's part of building a great game, and that is an attitude in and of itself. But I do think another key part of it is you have to manage. You have to manage through the inevitability of problems, rather than assuming you can manage to avoid all problems. But also, you can't squelch different opinions. And I completely agree with you. Having people polarized and arguing about everything, that destroys a team. Conversely, if we go, "Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't nice." No, you have to agree with everybody. You have to agree with me because I'm the boss. That also works very, very negatively.
Yeah, so exactly.
How do you encourage dissent, argumentation, because that's conflict resolution. That's raising and solving. People who are raising problems without trying to solve are destructive to a team. People who raise problems with the objective of solving them collaboratively with others, those people are very good for a team.
Oh, I'm going to quote you on that when I do my recruiting moving forward. We have this principle of Favro. We call it failure without learning is just failure.
Yeah.
And winning without learning is just winning once.
Yes. I really agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true.
Cool. So, you know what? My assistant, she was sending me this link before this interview, and she was saying, "You know how many books you wrote?" And I actually know that you've been writing fiction. So, but I clicked the link and I went to Amazon. I was like, "You've been writing a lot of books recently. COVID has been good for you."
It's interesting because I tend to write later at night after my wife has gone to bed, and I'll just take that last hour of the day, since I'm more of a night person. I'll take that last hour of the day, and not always, but many times I'll write. And so I took from 2008 to 2015, I wrote a novel, which turned out to be very successful. And I half joke and half speak seriously, because there's lessons to be learned in this.
Yeah.
So the novel had no deadline. Nobody was waiting for it. All the way through writing it, even though I was originally trained as a writer, I was afraid nobody's going to read this. This is kind of different. And I feel very lucky it worked out. But there was no deadline, so I'm just doing it late at night. The indie games book I wrote with a very specific deadline. I had been signed up to speak at a conference and talk about these topics. And I had the chance to have a book that was ready that would go with this. And so I forget exactly, it was 8 or 9 months. I wrote the book in 8 or 9 months because I had a deadline. And it tied, I didn't, because it was my work that it was for, I did it more of it during the day. But it just shows how deadlines are critical. Having a to-do list, checking things off, whether it's Agile or whatever system you use, it shows why these things are important, because no deadline, 7 years. Deadline, 8 or 9 months. Both books were successful. But the difference, and I like to talk about this because it tells people, oh, deadlines are evil. That's what people put on us to control us. No, deadlines are what inspire us to get our act together and get things done.
I think you're right about that. Okay, so this has been so great. And this whole pandemic thing is going up and down. So I don't know when the next time we see each other is, but you got San Francisco in your background, and I hope that's where we meet each other. Or I can't wait to get back to the US and do one of these great conferences and meet people in the flesh. I was at Slush last week in Finland, which was amazing because just seeing old friends and doing it. I mean, with a slight difference that you had to do like a COVID test before going into the party, but that's fine. So hopefully I'll see you soon. And, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with me.
This is great fun. And I really hope we get to see each other soon. I miss getting to sit down over a beer and have a conversation with you.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. If you want to elevate yourself as a modern leader and help your teams become even more successful, then check out Favro Academy at favro.com. There you will find podcasts, webinars, articles, all free of charge. Check it out.